Welcome to xnoesis. There are dimensions hidden not in space, but in our perception. The most mysterious and elusive of these is time itself. We think of it as a linear, undeniable flow of events, one after another. But is it really so? To explore this facet of reality, let's go to a place where moments stretch and compress under the pressure of collective emotion. A basketball arena. A place of collective emotion, teeming with an almost unimaginable 20,000 people. Each person is a tiny universe, but all of them are connected by a single shared moment, holding their breath, as if that very exhalation could change the fragile balance of fate. The air crackles with an almost palpable tension, a static charge of hope and fear that seems to thicken the very atmosphere. High above, suspended in the luminous glare of stadium lights, the clock on the scoreboard pulses with a malevolent, crimson glow. It is not merely a digital display. It has become a cruel, digital god, relentlessly counting down the final, agonizing seconds of existence for this particular contest. 3, 2, 1. Each digit vanishes, devoured by the relentless maw of the ticking moment, pulling the future into an irrevocable past. And then, there he is, the hero, or perhaps the tragic figure, depending on the outcome of this singular defining act. Sweat, a testament to his exertion and the immense pressure upon him, stings his eyes, blurring the edges of a world momentarily reduced to this one singular objective. He leaps, a silent prayer of muscle and will, defying gravity for a fleeting, desperate instant. The ball, a polished sphere of hope and destiny, leaves his fingertips. It ascends, tracing a perfect, hopeful arc against the backdrop of the cheering, screaming, or perhaps soon-to-be agonized crowd. For a full nanosecond, a sliver of time so incredibly thin, so ephemeral, so fleeting that it barely registers, a mere ghostly echo of existence, the ball hangs in its trajectory. It is the last gasp of possibility, and then the buzzer. A brutal, visceral sound, a final, unyielding scream of metallic finality tears through the air. But it is too late. The shot is good. It ripples through the net, a whisper of triumph. The crowd, a unified organism, erupts into a cacophony of sound, a deafening, joyous roar that shakes the very foundations of the building. Victory. The sequence of events in that stadium, for those 20,000 souls, for the referees, for the television commentators, for every human being caught in that moment, is absolute, undeniable. It is carved into the very granite of their shared reality. The ball was released, undeniably, demonstrably. Then, the clock hits zero. One event irrevocably preceded the other. It is a fact as solid, as immutable as the polished hardwood floorboards of the court itself. It is the very essence of cause and effect, the foundation of our understanding of sequence. It is the bedrock of what we call time. But what if I were to gently suggest that this rock-solid, undeniable fact is nothing more than a stubborn illusion? What if I told you that an observer, perhaps an astronaut, a silent sentinel suspended far above the Earth, watching this very game through the lens of a powerful, impossibly precise telescope while speeding past our planet in a fantastically fast spaceship, would perceive something utterly, fundamentally different? For this hypothetical astronaut, whose own frame of reference is radically altered by the sheer velocity of their cosmic journey, the reality is just as certain, just as absolute, as it was for the screaming crowd below. For them, the clock ticked down to zero, unequivocally, demonstrably, before the ball ever left the player's hands. The shot was invalid. It was a moment of grace that arrived too late. The home team lost. The roar of the crowd, a seemingly triumphant symphony, was for a phantom victory, a mirage of sound and fury, signifying nothing but a collective delusion. Consider the profound implications. Two observers, two equally valid realities, both witnessing the exact same physical event, the identical instant in the universe. Yet, their perceptions of the fundamental order of events, of what came first, what came second, the very arrow of causality, are diametrically opposed. How can this be? How can the linear, sequential flow of time, the very foundation of our understanding of existence, be a matter of opinion, a subjective interpretation rather than an objective truth? This is not, let me assure you, a trick of perception, not a mere delay in the light reaching the spaceship, easily dismissed as a function of distance. No, this is something far more profound. It is a fundamental crack, a deep and unsettling fissure in the very foundation of what we call time. This single, mind-shattering paradox, this exquisite challenge to our most basic intuitions, was born from the brilliant yet unassuming mind of a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, a man named Albert Einstein who, in 1905, forever altered our understanding of the cosmos. His special theory of relativity forces us to question everything. Not just how we measure time, but whether the past is truly gone, an irretrievable echo, whether the future is yet to be born, an unwritten page, and whether our own conscious experience of a flowing, passing, now, this ever-moving point of existence is, in fact, the greatest deception our own brains have ever concocted. The answer, as we shall explore tonight, doesn't just lie in the far-flung cosmos, in the esoteric realm of fantastically fast spaceships and the counterintuitive equations of relativity. It lies much closer, deeper within the gelatinous, 3-pound universe nestled between your ears, in the intricate and awe-inspiring wiring that allows you to comprehend these very words at all. It is here, within the neural symphony of your own mind, that the deepest secrets of time are both experienced and, perhaps, created. Our subjective sense of time, that deeply personal, internal clock that governs our perception of duration, is a remarkably fluid thing. It can be stretched and compressed, much like a piece of warm taffy, yielding to the forces of emotion, attention, and cognitive engagement. We have all, without exception, felt this peculiar elasticity. An hour spent in the company of someone you deeply love, engrossed in conversation, sharing laughter, or simply existing in comfortable silence, vanishes in what feels like a mere minute. The hands of the external clock race forward, blurring into an indistinguishable sweep, while your inner world revels in the timelessness of connection. Conversely, a single minute spent in excruciating physical pain, each second a grinding eternity, or in the icy grip of mortal fear, can expand into an eon, an endless, torturous stretch of suffering. The tick-tock of the world outside becomes a deafening hammer, each strike a profound agony. This isn't merely a poetic metaphor, a turn of phrase used by poets and philosophers to describe an emotional state. It is a profound and demonstrable feature of our neurology, a consequence of how our brains process and encode experience. Consider, for a moment, the haunting words of the eminent journalist John Hockenberry, recalling with vivid, almost painful clarity the precise moment his life was irrevocably changed, split into a definitive before and after. It was about 38 years ago, a seemingly ordinary night, as he slept fitfully in the back of a car, traversing a quiet, nondescript road in Pennsylvania. He woke, not gradually but abruptly, plunged into a nightmare already in motion. The world outside the car was a blur, a terrifying streak of indistinct shapes and colors. His first, horrifying realization: the driver, in the front seat, was asleep. Her head lolled, her hands slack on the wheel. The car, no longer constrained by conscious direction, was veering sharply, inexorably off the road. A metal projectile, hurtling towards an unknown fate. The passenger seated next to the driver, witnessing the unfolding catastrophe, reacted. Hockenberry watched, in what seemed like an impossibly slow, almost balletic gesture, as she reached over, her arm extending with a dreamlike slowness, and grabbed the steering wheel. He could see the strain in her muscles, the desperate tension in her grip, as she pulled with all her might. He can see it now, in his mind's eye, a loop of silent, terrifying cinema playing with pristine clarity. He sees the mouths of the occupants open in silent screams, expressions of raw, unadulterated terror etched onto their faces, like ancient masks frozen in an instant of pure dread. Yet his memory contains no sound, only a thick, heavy, suffocating silence, as if the very air had been sucked from the world, or as if his brain had prioritized visual information above all else. The car veers hard to the right, an unnatural, violent pivot, and then, very, very slowly, with a deliberate, agonizing precision, it connects with the guardrail, a metallic shriek that seems to happen in slow motion, stretching out into an impossible duration. The world turns upside down, then sideways, then upside down again, as the car flips violently into the air, a chaotic dance of shattering glass and twisting metal. In that suspended moment, as his body was tossed about like a rag doll, a feeling bloomed in his gut, cold and absolute, a chilling certainty that all of life, everything he had known, everything he would ever know, was about to change. It was a premonition of fate, delivered with the stark clarity of an oracle, a memory that, in objective, clock time, must have lasted only a second or two. A fleeting blink of an eye plays out in his mind, even decades later, like a feature-length film, an eternity unspooling in granular detail. The next thing he knew, consciousness returning from the abyss, he woke up in a hospital bed, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. It was the last time he ever walked. The accident had severed his spinal cord. But the temporal distortion, the way those few seconds unfolded into an eternity, remained an indelible mark on his perception of reality. This slow-motion effect, this radical and profound distortion of time perception during life-threatening events or moments of extreme emotional arousal, has not gone unnoticed by humanity. It has been documented curiously and consistently for centuries, woven into the fabric of anecdotal accounts and the occasional, intrepid scientific inquiry. As far back as 1892, a remarkably insightful Swiss geologist named Albert Heim, who was as fascinated by the human mind under duress as he was by the geological forces shaping mountains, took it upon himself to collect accounts from members of the Swiss Alpine Club. These were individuals who had survived terrifying falls from dizzying heights or other harrowing, near-death experiences in the unforgiving embrace of the mountains. The reports he gathered were, to his astonishment, shockingly consistent in their descriptions of temporal anomaly. 95% of them described a state of dominant mental quickness. Their mental activity, he wrote, became enormous, an almost unimaginable surge rising to a hundredfold velocity or intensity, as if the very gears of their minds had been suddenly, miraculously supercharged. In this intensely heightened state, time itself became greatly expanded, stretched like an elastic band, each fleeting second teeming with an impossible amount of perceived information. They reported acting with lightning quickness, their judgments perfectly attuned to the immediate, dire situation, making complex decisions in what seemed like an infinitely protracted moment. Many even experienced a sudden, panoramic review of their entire lives, a phenomenon often referred to as a quote-quote life review, where a lifetime of memories flashed before their eyes in an instant, a compressed autobiography unfolding at impossible speed. These accounts, gathered from the raw edge of survival, painted a consistent picture. When faced with immediate annihilation, the brain's relationship with time underwent a profound and inexplicable transformation. It is, perhaps, intuitively obvious, but still worth stating, that it is exceedingly difficult to study this phenomenon in a controlled laboratory setting. Ethics boards, quite rightly, tend to look unfavorably on research proposals that involve intentionally putting human subjects in genuinely life-threatening situations. The pursuit of knowledge, however fascinating, must always yield to the imperative of safety and human well-being. Nevertheless, smaller-scale studies, carefully designed to elicit high emotional arousal without endangering participants, have attempted to replicate elements of this temporal distortion. These experiments have involved everything from subjects watching deeply scary videos, designed to induce fear and heightened physiological responses, to the more physically demanding task of jumping from a significant height into a safety net. The results of these more constrained studies, while not replicating the full intensity of a near-death experience, consistently confirm the basic principle. People, when exposed to highly emotional or frightening events, reliably and significantly overestimate the duration of those events. An event that subjectively unfolds in slow motion naturally feels like it takes longer. The brain, perceiving more information packed into a given external interval, interprets this richness as an extension of time. But this, as intriguing as it is merely the tip of the iceberg. Our internal sense of time, that deeply personal chronometer ticking within us, is, to put it bluntly, wildly, charmingly, and profoundly inaccurate. It is not a precision instrument designed for perfect fidelity to the universal clock. Rather, it is more akin to a funhouse mirror, reflecting a distorted, whimsical, and utterly personal version of reality. The common aphorisms that pepper our language are, in fact, remarkably precise descriptions of this neurological reality. A watched pot never boils, we say, expressing the agonizing drag of time when our attention is fixed, our expectations strained, our very consciousness counting every agonizing second. Time flies when you're having fun. Conversely, captures the effortless, almost imperceptible passage of hours when we are deeply engaged, absorbed, and utterly present in an enjoyable activity. These aren't just quaint cliches. They are empirically verifiable phenomena of our brain's temporal processing. Consider the crushing boredom of a tedious lecture, where every minute feels like an hour, the drone of the speaker, a hypnotic lullaby that fails to induce sleep, only a painful awareness of passing time. Or the agonizing wait on an airport tarmac, delayed for hours, strapped into a cramped seat, watching the world outside move at a snail's pace. These experiences can induce a peculiar state known as xnoesis, a term derived from Greek roots meaning time standing still, the sensation that time has literally frozen solid, each second stretching out into an eternity. Conversely, when you're utterly lost in the compelling narrative of a good book, immersed in the intricate challenges of a beloved hobby, or deep in a state of creative flow, that almost transcendent space where conscious effort melts away and ideas flow effortlessly, hours can simply vaporize. Time seems to jump forward, leaving no trace of the moments in between, as if entire swaths of experience have been compressed into nothingness. So, what exactly is going on? Why does our brain play these elaborate tricks on us? What is the fundamental relationship between the steady, unforgiving tick of an external, objective clock, the universal rhythm of the cosmos, and the fluid, chaotic, and utterly personal river of time we experience internally? Is one more real than the other? Are they two sides of the same coin, or entirely separate phenomena? To begin to untangle this intricate knot, to shed some light on this fascinating duality, we must first understand that our brain, in its exquisite complexity, engages in two fundamentally different kinds of temporal measurement, two distinct modes of timing. These are called prospective and retrospective timing. It's not a simple linear process, but rather a bidirectional problem, a constant interplay between looking forward and looking back. Imagine yourself immersed in the convivial atmosphere of a party. The air is filled with laughter, the murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses. Your friend Amy turns to you and says, "Remind me to leave in 5 minutes." This, my curious listener, is a quintessential example of prospective timing. You know in advance, explicitly, that a timing task is required of you. Your brain receives a clear instruction to initiate a temporal measurement. You can, in a metaphorical sense, start a stopwatch in your head, mentally marking time 0 at Amy's request, and then consciously or unconsciously track the passage of the next 300 seconds. Your attention is, to some degree, directed towards the future interval. Now, consider a second scenario, subtly yet fundamentally different. Amy excuses herself, waving goodbye, and gracefully exits the party, perhaps to fetch something, or simply to take a break. 5 minutes later, your friend Bert, arriving late, sidles up to you and casually asks, "How long ago did Amy leave?" This, unequivocally, is a task of retrospective timing. Your mental stopwatch, the one you might have used in the first scenario, is utterly useless here. You were never told at the moment of Amy's departure to start timing. You had no forewarning, no intention of measuring that interval. Instead, you are forced to work backward, to reconstruct the past from the raw materials of your memory. Retrospective timing, therefore, isn't really a timing task in the conventional sense at all. It is, at its core, a memory task. It's an act of inference, of piecing together and reconstructing the duration of a past interval based on the density, the richness, and the emotional significance of the events you stored in your memory during that period. The brain, without a preset timer, estimates duration by assessing how much stuff happened. This seemingly simple distinction, the difference between prospective and retrospective timing, explains a multitude of temporal paradoxes, including one that some researchers affectionately refer to as the holiday paradox. Picture yourself, for example, enduring a 5-hour wait for a hopelessly delayed flight to Greece. You are stranded in an airport, surrounded by the monotonous drone of announcements, the endless stream of bored travelers, and the oppressive artificial lighting. Every second stretches into an eternity. You are locked firmly in a state of prospective timing, constantly checking your watch, agonizingly aware of every passing moment, your attention hyper-focused on the delay. You are, in essence, counting the ticks. Meanwhile, the very next day, an exciting, action-packed tour of ancient Athens unfolds before you. You are exploring the majestic Parthenon, wandering through the ancient agora, tasting exotic new foods, and absorbing the vibrant energy of the city. Time seems to fly by in an instant, a blur of vivid experiences. You are so engaged, so absorbed, so utterly present in the novelty and excitement that you are not paying attention to time at all. The internal stopwatch is not running consciously. But here is where the script flips entirely, revealing the paradox. A week later, when you look back on your vacation, when you engage in the act of retrospective timing, the experience of the airport delay has shrunk in your memory to a mere blip, a forgettable annoyance, a compressed footnote in the grand narrative of your trip. It might have felt like an eternity at the time, but in retrospect, its experiential density was so low, so monotonous, that it occupies very little space in your memory. The day in Athens, however, filled with novel sights, exhilarating sounds, rich flavors, and a cascade of unique, engaging experiences, expands dramatically in your memory. It feels vast, rich, and long. The sheer volume of new information, of unique, memorable moments, makes the day seem, in retrospect, much longer than it felt while it was happening. The pioneering psychologist and philosopher William James, with his characteristic profound insight, noticed this over a century ago. In general, he wrote in his seminal 1890 work, The Principles of Psychology, a time filled with varied and interesting experiences seems short in passing, but long as we look back. On the other hand, a tract of time empty of experiences seems long in passing, but in retrospect short. Your retrospective estimate of duration is based, in large part, on the sheer number of new memories you formed. The quantity of experiential data your brain processed and encoded. The awe-inspiring Parthenon, with its ancient columns and breathtaking views, will always earn more memory slots, more vivid details, than the sterile, fluorescent-lit airport bathroom. This unbreakable, often tragic link between the richness of memory and our sense of past time is perhaps nowhere more profoundly and heart-wrenchingly illustrated than by the case of Clive Wearing, a brilliant British musicologist and conductor. In 1985, a severe brain infection, specifically a form of herpes encephalitis, tragically destroyed the parts of his brain crucial for forming new long-term memories. The damage was particularly severe in his hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobe, essential for consolidating experiences into enduring recollections. Clive Wearing became, as neurologist Oliver Sacks so movingly described, trapped in a constantly resetting present. Every moment was new, yet instantly forgotten. He would greet his beloved wife, Deborah, with immense joy and surprise, as if seeing her for the first time in years, only for that recognition to vanish within minutes, leaving him to greet her again and again and again. His diary, which he compulsively wrote in, often multiple times an hour, was a heartbreaking, profoundly disturbing testament to his condition. He would write, with absolute conviction, "Now I am really completely awake, experiencing a fleeting moment of clarity," only to cross it out moments later, his mind having reset, and write, with equal conviction, "Now I am perfectly awake, first time." This cycle of writing, crossing out and rewriting occurred over and over again, an endless loop of temporal amnesia. Without the ability to lay down new memories of what had just happened, without any neural record of the preceding seconds, minutes, or hours, he had no retrospective sense of time whatsoever. He couldn't make sense of where he was, or how he had arrived at that particular moment. His mind, in its desperate attempt to forge coherence in a world of constant forgetting, could only confabulate one explanation: he must have just woken up. He was a man adrift on an ocean of time, a vast, featureless expanse, with no memory of the voyage, perpetually arriving at a shore he could never recognize, condemned to an eternal present devoid of continuity. His story is a powerful, poignant illustration of how foundational memory is to our experience of time's linear progression. Without memory, time fragments dissolves into an endless series of disconnected nows. Even on the scale of mere seconds, the difference between prospective and retrospective timing is stark, revealing the brain's remarkable malleability. In one classic and illuminating experiment designed to probe these distinctions, subjects were given a stack of cards and asked to perform a task for a precisely measured 42 seconds of objective clock time. The subjects were divided into two groups. One group had a relatively simple, low cognitive load task. They were merely asked to deal the cards into a single pile. This required minimal attention and mental effort. The other group was given a high cognitive load task. They had to sort the cards by suit into 4 separate piles, a task requiring sustained attention, planning, and rapid decision-making. When the subjects knew in advance that they would be asked to estimate the duration of the task, the prospective timing condition, the results were remarkably divergent. The group performing the single-pile low cognitive load task guessed, on average, that 53 seconds had passed. Their attention, not fully consumed by the simple act of dealing, seemed to have been more keenly attuned to the passage of time itself, making the 42 seconds feel longer. Meanwhile, the sorting group, whose cognitive resources were fully engaged by the demanding task, guessed only 31 seconds. The harder the task, the more attention it demanded, the faster time seemed to fly. Their perception of time was compressed, perhaps because their internal clock was less consciously monitored, or because their mental effort created a subjective sense of rapid progress. But when they were surprised with a question afterward, asked to estimate the duration without prior warning, the retrospective timing condition, the results flipped, though the effect was less pronounced. The single-pile group, looking back, guessed 28 seconds. The sorting group, however, retrospectively guessed 33 seconds. Here, the higher cognitive load, the very thing that made time fly in the prospective condition, created more memorable micro-events, more data points in the mental record. This increased density of experience made the period seem longer in retrospect. The most shocking and counterintuitive part of this experiment lay in the comparison for the exact same task, dealing cards into one pile for 42 seconds. The prospective estimate for this task was nearly double the retrospective one, 53 seconds versus 28 seconds. This profound disparity underscores a critical truth. Our judgment of time isn't just inaccurate, it's profoundly context-dependent, easily warped by a factor of 2 or more, a testament to the brain's subjective construction of temporal reality. This inherent malleability of time perception isn't solely about grand emotions or cognitively demanding tasks. It happens constantly, quietly, in subtle ways, woven into the fabric of our everyday experience, often unnoticed until pointed out. Take, for instance, the curious phenomenon known as the stopped clock illusion, or sometimes the chronostasis effect, though chronostasis is also used for longer periods of frozen time. You glance at an analog clock, perhaps on a wall, with a visible ticking second hand. For a brief, almost imperceptible instant, that very first second you observe seems to stretch out, to last demonstrably longer than a normal objective second. You might even find yourself momentarily thinking the clock has stopped altogether, its mechanism jammed, before you finally see the hand lurch forward, resuming its relentless, steady march. What exactly is happening within the intricate machinery of your mind during this fleeting moment? The illusion appears to be intimately caused by our own actions, specifically by the rapid, jerky eye movements known as saccades. The act of shifting your gaze, of redirecting your attention from one point in space to another, subtly speeds up an internal timer in the brain, or perhaps, more accurately, causes the brain to retrospectively fill in the missing visual information. When your eyes jump from one point to another, your brain temporarily suppresses visual input during the saccade itself to prevent a blurred image. When your gaze lands on the second hand, your brain takes the first clear image it receives termly turix off to the saccade, and then retrospectively dates the perception to asterisk before the saccade began. This makes the interval between the first perceived position of the second hand and its subsequent movement seem longer than it actually was. More ticks of your internal subjective clock accumulate during that 1-second interval, leading to an overestimation of its duration. It's a tiny, almost trivial glimpse, yet it is a profound testament to the fact that our subjective experience of time is not a passive reception of objective reality. It's a construction, an elaborate story the brain tells itself, seamlessly stitching together fragments of perception and memory into a coherent but often edited narrative. And sometimes, that story, that constructed reality, can be radically rewritten, not just by attention or memory, but by the powerful influence of chemistry. Psychoactive drugs, those chemical keys that unlock hidden chambers of the mind, can throw our finely tuned sense of time into utter chaos, creating distortions that range from mildly disorienting to profoundly unsettling. The indefatigable William James, ever the intrepid psychological explorer, not content to merely observe, actively delved into these altered states. He famously noted this temporal disruption from his own personal experience with hashish, a potent cannabinoid derivative. In hashish intoxication, he wrote, with a detached scientific curiosity, there is a curious increase in the apparent time perspective. We utter a sentence, and ere the end is reached, the beginning seems already to date from indefinitely long ago. Imagine the profound, almost absurd sensation. Each word, each syllable, stretching into an immense chasm of time, the very act of speaking becoming an archaeological excavation of forgotten utterances. Anyone who has ever found themselves in a smoke-filled room, immersed in the altered realities induced by similar substances, might relate instantly to the classic anecdote of two hippies in Golden Gate Park, languidly watching a jet airplane streak across the impossibly blue sky. As the distant silver dart finally disappears from view, one turns slowly to the other, his eyes wide with a profound, almost existential weariness, and drawls, "Man, I thought he'd never leave." Time, for them, seemed to slow down, to drag, to dilate, to an almost unbearable extent. The world outside, the world of objective seconds, continued its relentless pace, but their internal experience was one of glacial, agonizing slowness. Let's be exceedingly clear about what that means, however, lest we fall into a common semantic trap. When we say, colloquially, that time slows down under the influence of a drug, we are being inherently self-centered in our perspective. We are using our own internal clock, the rhythm of our subjective experience, as the fixed reference point, the anchor against which everything else is measured. But what's truly happening is precisely the opposite. Our internal clock is speeding up. Imagine, if you will, a hypothetical clock deep within your brain, a biological chronometer that, under normal conditions, ticks 10 times per objective second. Now, under the influence of a specific psychoactive substance, that internal clock might suddenly, dramatically, start ticking 20, 30, or even more times per second. So, in a 5-second interval of external objective time, your brain, running at this accelerated pace, has counted off what it interprets as 10, 15, or even more seconds. The world outside, with its measured, consistent pace, appears to be moving in agonizingly slow motion relative to your own frantic, hyper-accelerated internal tempo. Laboratory studies, using more precise and controlled methodologies, consistently confirm this phenomenon. Researchers administer tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the primary active component in cannabis, to human subjects. They then ask these individuals to tell them when, in their subjective judgment, 60 seconds have passed. On average, subjects under the influence of THC will stop the external clock at around 42 seconds of objective time. Their faster internal clock has already counted to 60, signaling to them that a minute has elapsed, even though significantly less objective time has passed. This is not a failure of judgment, but a direct reflection of an altered internal pace. This isn't just a uniquely human phenomenon either. We can, in a fascinating way, even ask animals how much time they think has passed by observing their behavior. In a typical and widely used experimental paradigm, a laboratory rat is trained to perform a specific action, say pressing a lever, to receive a food reward. The key is that the reward is only delivered after a fixed interval, for example, 30 seconds, has passed since a light came on in their cage. The rat, remarkably, learns to time its presses, clustering them around the 30-second mark, demonstrating an internal sense of duration. Now, what happens if the rat gets high? If THC is introduced into its system? With the cannabinoid circulating, the peak time of its lever pressing shifts significantly earlier to around 29 seconds or even less. This is perfectly consistent with the human reports. The rat's internal clock is running fast, causing it to anticipate the 30-second mark sooner than it objectively arrives. The most well-studied pharmacological effects on these internal timing mechanisms often involve the neurotransmitter dopamine. The prominent psychologist and neuroscientist Warren Meck, a pioneer in the field of time perception, proposed a compelling hypothesis that dopamine levels directly alter the speed of the brain's timing circuits. This is not simply a theoretical construct. Give rats a stimulant like methamphetamine, a powerful drug that dramatically boosts dopamine levels in the brain, and their internal timing shifts significantly earlier. They might start pressing the lever at 17 seconds instead of the usual 20, because their internal clock is accelerating. But remarkably, after a few days of consistent exposure to the drug, they recalibrate. It's as if their brains learn to work with their chronically fast clock, realizing that a new, larger number of internal ticks now corresponds to the 20-second interval required for the reward. Then, when the drug is removed and their dopamine levels return to normal, their clock slows back down, but their learned calibration, their internal counting, remains reset to the higher number of ticks. As a result, they overshoot the mark, waiting longer than 20 seconds of objective time because their internal, now slower clock is still aiming for the inflated tick count they learned while under the influence. It is important to acknowledge that these studies are inherently messy and complex. Drugs, especially those that profoundly affect the brain, have widespread effects on attention, motivation, memory, and general cognitive processing. Isolating the precise effect on timing is challenging. However, despite these complexities, these experiments provide strong, compelling evidence for what neuroscientists increasingly refer to as the multiple clock principle. This concept posits that there is no single, monolithic master clock in the brain, no single neurotransmitter or dedicated brain region responsible for all aspects of time perception. Instead, different drugs can affect our judgment of short intervals but not long ones, or vice versa, suggesting a whole suite of different interacting timing mechanisms, each tuned to different temporal scales, each contributing to our overall experience of duration. The brain is not a single stopwatch, but a vast orchestra of specialized chronometers, each playing its part in the grand symphony of time. So, where does this leave us with the profound, almost supernatural slow motion effect observed in life-or-death crises, the kind experienced by John Hockenberry or Albert Heim's mountaineers? Scientists have proposed three main hypotheses, none of which are mutually exclusive. It's possible that all, or some combination of these mechanisms are at play, contributing to the distorted experience of extreme duress. The first is the overclocking hypothesis. This concept draws an analogy from computer science. Your computer's central processing unit, its CPU, has an internal clock that sets the rate of its operations, determining how many calculations it can perform per second. Enthusiast gamers seeking maximum performance often overclock their CPUs, forcing them to run faster than their factory settings, processing more information per second. The hypothesis suggests that, perhaps, in a moment of extreme danger, when survival hangs in the balance, the brain does something analogous. A sudden, massive flood of fight-or-flight neurochemicals, such as norepinephrine and adrenaline, could cause neurons throughout the brain to fire a bit faster, to communicate a bit more easily, to become hyper-responsive. Attention sharpens to an almost laser-like intensity, reaction times decrease to fractions of what is normal, and the world seems to unfold in excruciating detail. This mechanism might well account for the incredible feats of temporal precision exhibited by professional athletes, those who seem to defy the laws of physics, or highly trained fighter pilots, whose brains are already wired and disciplined for instantaneous life-or-death decisions. Their brains, already operating at peak efficiency, might simply be pushed into a temporary state of super-efficiency. However, for the rest of us, for untrained individuals suddenly thrust into a crisis, it is unlikely to account for the dramatic, almost mythical, 100-fold increase in mental speed reported by Heim. More often, untrained people, faced with sudden peril, tend to freeze, to panic, or to suffer from, quote, tunnel vision, rather than achieving a state of superhuman clarity. So while overclocking might contribute to some degree, subtly enhancing processing speed, it cannot be the whole story. The second is the hypermemory hypothesis. This perspective suggests that the slow motion effect, that feeling of time dilating, is not an experience that occurs in moment, but rather an illusion created night per after the fact, during the act of recalling the event. According to this view, at the precise moment of the accident or crisis, your perception of time is, more or less, normal. There is no conscious slowing down. However, the intense emotional state triggered by the danger, the raw terror, the surge of adrenaline, causes your brain to record the event with far greater detail and temporal resolution than it normally would. It's akin to switching your internal camera from standard definition video to ultra-high definition 8K, capturing every single frame, every minute nuance, every speck of dust in the air. Later, when you recall the memory, when you mentally replay the traumatic sequence, there is so much more information to unpack, so many more frames in the mental movie, that it feels, experientially, as though the event must have taken a very long time to unfold. This hypothesis makes intuitive sense in many ways. We know unequivocally that highly emotional events can create powerful, vivid, and enduring flashbulb memories, etched into the mind with an almost photographic clarity. And in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, these memories can be debilitatingly strong, recurring with overwhelming intensity. But here's the crucial caveat. This theory doesn't fully account for the feeling that time is slowing down in the moment as it happens during the experience itself. I can personally attest to this from my own experience in a car accident. As the car spun, disorientingly, uncontrollably, my distinct and conscious thought, clear as a bell amidst the chaos, was, "Wow, time really does slow down." That very thought itself suggests that the perception of temporal distortion was occurring concurrently with the event, an immediate sensory experience, not merely a reconstruction manufactured in retrospect. This leads us, then, to the third and perhaps most profound and arguably the most accurate idea, the meta-illusion hypothesis. This theory states, provocatively, that our normal, everyday sense of time's linear passage, our unquestioning belief in a steadily flowing now, is already itself an illusion. It is a convenient, functional narrative, a meticulously constructed story, created by the unconscious brain to make sense of a chaotic input, to provide a coherent framework for our conscious experience. If this is true, then the slow-motion effect observed in crises is not simply an illusion, but an illusion of an illusion. Trying to explain the dramatic distortion of time in a crisis without first understanding the fundamental nature of our normal sense of time is like trying to fix a slow-motion movie without knowing anything about how a projector works in the first place, or without understanding the basic principles of film speed. Consciousness itself, the very state of being aware, appears to be a deeply delayed, intricately edited account of what's happening. We know from pioneering neuroscience experiments that the brain can predict a person's free decision to move their finger almost a full second before the person themselves is consciously aware of having made that decision. The conscious I that feels it made a choice is, in a sense, being presented with a fait accompli, a decision already made by deeper, unconscious processes. Perhaps the slow-motion feeling in a crisis is simply another layer of this neural deception, another clever trick played by the brain's internal narrative engine. The reports from survivors often include more than just time distortion. They describe out-of-body experiences, a bizarre sensation of seeing themselves as if on a movie screen, a strange detachment from space itself, a feeling of floating above the scene. Perhaps the massive neurochemical flood during a fight-or-flight response, the deluge of adrenaline and other powerful substances, simply induces a form of hallucination, a radically altered state of consciousness where the normal rules of perception are suspended, where the brain's narrative engine goes into overdrive, or perhaps reinterprets data in a fundamentally different way. The brain isn't necessarily processing more information faster, it's just labeling the experience differently, constructing a different kind of reality. The speedometer of subjective time, that dial we perceive as constantly ticking forward, is a mechanism that the brain can, under extreme duress, turn down, slow to a crawl, regardless of the actual speed of the external engine of the universe. The real mystery, then, the profound, unanswered question, isn't the slow-motion effect itself. That is merely a spectacular symptom. The real mystery is our normal perception of the fluid, unidirectional flow of time to begin with. Why does it feel this way? What purpose does it serve? Before we try to find the grand, majestic clocks within the body that measure the long, slow rhythms of day and night, before we delve into the intricate dance of light and darkness, we must first descend into a far more ephemeral world. A realm hidden from our conscious awareness, yet it is the very bedrock, the fundamental foundation, upon which our most human, most sophisticated abilities are built. This is the world of microseconds and milliseconds, of time intervals so fleeting they defy intuitive comprehension, yet are utterly essential for our very survival and interaction with the world. Close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. Just listen to the subtle nuances of the soundscape around you, even the gentle hum of silence that you may perceive. You can tell, almost instantly, with an effortless, unconscious precision, if a sound is coming from your left or your right. How does your brain achieve this instantaneous, almost magical feat of spatial localization? Your brain is, in this regard, a hypersensitive, exquisitely calibrated measuring device, a bioacoustic chronometer of unparalleled accuracy. A sound originating from your left will arrive at your left ear a fraction of a moment, an infinitesimal sliver of time before it reaches your right ear. These interaural time delays, as they are technically known, can be astonishingly short, as brief as 10 microseconds. To put that into perspective, a microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. We are talking about 100,000th of a second, a duration so fleeting it is beyond our conscious grasp. Yet, your auditory system, in its profound wisdom, measures these infinitesimal gaps with breathtaking precision, using them to construct a dynamic, three-dimensional map of sound in space, allowing you to pinpoint the exact location of a rustle in the leaves, a distant siren, or a whispered word. Evolution, in its profound, intricate wisdom, understood a fundamental truth about the universe long before physicists articulated it in equations and theories. Space and time are inextricably intertwined, two facets of the same underlying reality. By telling time with exquisite, almost unimaginable precision, the brain can, literally and figuratively, tell space. It calculates location from temporal difference. On a slightly longer, yet still incredibly swift, time scale, from tens of milliseconds to about a second, our temporal abilities are perhaps at their most breathtaking, forming the very essence of our complex cognitive life. This is the realm of music, that universal language of emotion and of speech, the intricate tapestry of human communication. Consider, for example, the subtle, almost imperceptible difference between the words grade A and grade A. The phonetic components, the individual sounds, are remarkably similar. The crucial distinction lies not just in the articulation of those sounds, but in the microscopic pauses, the precise durations of phonemes, and the subtle temporal boundaries that delineate one word from another, that allow your brain to parse the continuous stream of sound into meaningful units. The emotional state of a speaker, the sluggish, heavy, almost laborious speech of someone experiencing profound depression, their words emerging slowly, heavily, as if burdened by an invisible weight, versus the rapid-fire, effervescent excitement of a teenager recounting a thrilling event, their words tumbling out in a joyous cascade is conveyed not just by their choice of vocabulary, but crucially, through prosody. Prosody is the musical rhythm of their words, the intonation, the stress, the tempo, and the rhythm that ride on the spoken word, providing an almost subconscious layer of meaning. It's a language that transcends words, speaking directly to our emotional centers. You can listen to a muffled conversation through a wall, unable to make out a single word, every syllable obscured, yet you can often tell, with uncanny accuracy, if the tone conveyed is one of simmering anger, intense frustration, or joyful celebration. This remarkable ability is your brain, ceaselessly analyzing patterns in time, extracting emotional information from the very cadence of speech. Even humor, that most human and often elusive of cognitive phenomena, is, at its core, an intricate game of timing. A well-told joke relies on a delicate balance of expectation and surprise. The punchline, the unexpected twist that elicits laughter, must be genuinely unexpected, defying the brain's predictive models. But, critically, it must also arrive at precisely the right moment, delivered with an impeccable temporal precision. The brain, as we are increasingly understanding, is fundamentally a prediction machine, constantly modeling what will happen next and, just as importantly, select when it will happen. If the punchline comes too early, before the setup has adequately built the expectation, there's no time for the brain to establish the cognitive scaffolding against which the punchline can create a satisfying violation. The humor falls flat. If it comes too late, the moment has passed. The brain has moved on, its attention diverted, and the surprise curdles into confusion, or worse, mere awkwardness. The art of comedy, then, in its deepest sense, is, in part, the subtle art of hijacking the brain's predictive timing mechanisms, of playfully manipulating our temporal expectations. But what happens when these intricate, finely tuned temporal mechanisms are still under construction, still in their nascent stages of development? Anyone who has bravely attempted to learn a foreign language as an adult knows the feeling of being utterly overwhelmed, submerged in a seemingly incomprehensible torrent of sound. Native speakers, to the novice ear, seem to talk at a blistering, incomprehensible speed, their words blurring into an indistinguishable stream, like a river flowing too fast to discern individual droplets. The very act of slowing the speech down, of reducing the tempo of the auditory input, is often the crucial factor that allows our novice brains to begin to parse that continuous stream of sounds into individual words, to identify the boundaries, to extract meaning. Babies and young children face this exact same challenge, but on a far grander scale. This is precisely why, across virtually all human cultures, adults instinctively and unconsciously shift into what linguists and developmental psychologists call motherese or parentese, or more formally infant-directed speech, when speaking to infants. The pitch of the voice goes up, adopting a more sing-song quality. The vowels are elongated, stretched out into exaggerated sounds, creating clearer phonetic targets, and crucially, the pauses between words and phrases are dramatically stretched out. Normal pauses between phrases in adult conversation might average around 700 milliseconds, barely a blink of an eye. In motherese, however, those pauses can extend to well over a second, providing little islands of silence for the infant's still developing brain to process and categorize the sounds. We are, without thinking, without conscious instruction, providing our children with a slowed-down, overemphasized temporal scaffolding, a phonetic slow-motion replay, to help them build their fundamental understanding of language, to map sounds to meaning, and to discern the very rhythm of communication. It is a beautiful, unconscious act of temporal teaching. This fascinating observation of universal, instinctual temporal adjustment in language acquisition brings us to a deeper, more fundamental biological question. We are surrounded by clocks, in countless forms, on our wrists, on our walls, glowing on the screens of our phones, omnipresent external markers of time's relentless march. But, in a profound and perhaps surprising sense, we are also filled with them. Every single cell in your body, from the most complex neuron in your brain to the most basic hepatocyte in your liver, from the specialized cells of your skin to the innermost core of your bone marrow, possesses a sophisticated, intricately calibrated molecular mechanism to tell the time of day. How on earth does it achieve such a feat at the cellular level? And why would a humble mouse's seemingly compulsive desire to run on a wheel provide one of the most profound and elegant clues to this deep biological mystery? If you have ever had the opportunity to observe a mouse in a pet shop, or indeed any small rodent in an enclosure, you have probably witnessed its boundless enthusiasm for running on a wheel. It is an almost irresistible urge, a peculiar, often mesmerizing display of sustained physical activity. This curious predilection for wheel running is, in fact, one of science's more charming little mysteries, but also one of its most useful. Why do they do it? It's not merely boredom, as one might assume for a captive animal. Wild mice have a forgotten wheel. They will even actively work for it, learning to press a lever to release a brake so they can engage in their favorite activity, demonstrating a powerful motivation that goes beyond simple recreation. This peculiar, innate habit, however, has been an invaluable gift to scientific inquiry, providing a perfect, unambiguous way to track the animal's daily activity pattern. Researchers utilize a simple but powerful tool called an actogram, a graph that visually captures this rhythmic pattern. Every time the wheel completes a revolution, a small vertical tick is marked on a rotating drum or digital display. The result is a beautiful, almost artistic, visual record of the mouse's life, a temporal fingerprint of its waking and sleeping cycles. Mice are primarily nocturnal creatures, so when the lab lights, mimicking the sun, are extinguished, the actogram explodes with a dense cluster of black marks as the mouse engages in frantic, continuous running throughout the entire night. This pattern, under normal light-dark conditions, is strikingly regular and predictable, but the truly fascinating and revealing part comes when the scientists change the rules of the environment. They switch the room to a state of permanent, unending darkness, eliminating all external time cues. There are no sunrises, no sunsets, no artificial light cycles. And yet, remarkably, the mouse continues its rhythmic life. It still oscillates between long periods of intense activity and long periods of profound rest, following a consistent pattern of wakefulness and sleep. The rhythm is still there, robust, and undeniable. This proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the daily cycle of activity and rest is not merely a reactive response to the outside world. Like a passive plant opening its leaves to the sun, there must be an internal clock, a biological pacemaker, a deeply ingrained, self-sustaining temporal mechanism. This internal rhythm is known as a circadian clock, a term derived from the Latin circa, meaning approximately, and dian, meaning for day, and approximately daily rhythm. However, in the constant darkness, something subtle yet profoundly important begins to happen, revealing the true nature of this internal timekeeper. The neat, precise vertical columns of activity, which under normal light cycles were perfectly aligned day after day, start to drift. Each subsequent day, the mouse begins its nightly run a little bit earlier or a little bit later, depending on the species. For mice, the pattern on the actogram shifts progressively to the left. This reveals that the mouse's internal, free-running clock, uncorrected by external cues, is not perfectly tuned to 24 hours. Its natural intrinsic period is slightly shorter, closer to 23.5 hours. Humans, being diurnal creatures by nature, tend to have an intrinsic free-running period that is slightly longer than 24 hours, typically around 24.2 to 24.5 hours. But how good, how accurate and precise is this intrinsic biological clock? In terms of raw accuracy, being off by half an hour in 24 isn't bad at all. It represents an error of only about 2%. However, its precision, its consistency from one cycle to the next, is even more impressive. The amount of drift each day, the deviation from a perfect 24-hour cycle, is remarkably consistent. The standard deviation in the onset of activity can be as low as 10 to 20 minutes, day after day, week after week. This level of consistency represents a precision of approximately 1%. To put that astounding feat of biological engineering into perspective, this humble, ancient biological clock, built from nothing more than proteins and genes, operating within a tiny rodent, outperforms every single man-made clock built before the 17th century, before the ingenious Dutch scientist Christian Huygens perfected the pendulum clock, harnessing the precision of physics to measure time. It is a testament to the power of evolution to create exquisitely precise temporal instruments. What happens then when you put a human being in a similar state of profound isolation, stripped of all external temporal cues? The answer is both fascinating and, for the participant, often deeply challenging. The pioneering French geologist Michel Siffre, a man of extraordinary courage and scientific dedication, found out firsthand in 1972, embarking on an audacious experiment backed by NASA. He spent an astonishing 6 months alone, deep inside a cavernous, pitch-black cave in Texas. He had no clocks, no windows to the outside world, no sunlight, no radio, no telephone, no sense of the Earth's rhythms whatsoever. He was completely free-running, his internal clock, uncorrected by any external Zeitgeber, any time-giver. But unlike the mice, who seemed to take such isolation relatively in stride, continuing their rhythmic lives with minor adjustments, the experience was brutal, almost psychologically devastating for Siffre. He suffered profound bouts of depression, a deep, pervasive sense of psychological distress, compounded by severe memory lapses, as his sense of temporal continuity fractured. His circadian clock, unmoored from external reality, went haywire. His internal day, his subjective perception of a full cycle of wakefulness and sleep, stretched dramatically, sometimes to 25 or 26 hours, and at times it jumped to an astonishing 48-hour cycle, where he would stay awake for over 32 hours straight, experiencing a profound sense of temporal dilation, only to then sleep for an epic 16 hours. On day 179 of the experiment, a surface crew, who had been meticulously tracking objective time, called down into the depths of the cave to tell him it was finally over. Siffre was utterly shocked. By his own subjective count, living entirely by his internal desynchronized rhythm, he had only been in the cave for 151 days. He had, in his internal experience, literally lost 28 days, a staggering discrepancy. His subjective sense of time had dilated profoundly, slowing down dramatically compared to the objective world, swallowed by the timelessness of the cave. This wasn't a fluke, it was a consistent finding. Other isolation experiments, including that of the Italian decorator Stefania Follini, who spent 4 months in a cave, also reported a similar, profound discrepancy, believing only 2 months had passed. Our sophisticated human minds, it seems, for all their complexity, seem to have a much more fragile, more susceptible grasp on the steady linear passage of days than a humble mouse. Our reliance on external cues is profound. So where exactly is this master clock, this central pacemaker that orchestrates the daily rhythms of our bodies and minds? In the 1970s, a crucial decade for the burgeoning field of chronobiology, scientists pinpointed its precise location. It's a tiny, almost inconspicuous structure nestled deep within the brain, at its very base, positioned right above the point where the optic nerves, carrying visual information from your eyes, cross over. This remarkably small, yet immensely powerful cluster of neurons is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. It is deceptively diminutive, containing only about 10,000 neurons in humans, a mere drop in the ocean of the brain's billions of cells, yet its influence is pervasive. The definitive proof of the SCN's role as the master clock came from a brilliant, almost sci-fi experiment performed in the 1980s, a testament to the ingenuity of neuroscience. Scientists utilized two distinct strains of hamsters, small, furry rodents, often used in circadian rhythm research. Normal hamsters in free-running conditions have a remarkably stable intrinsic period of about 24 hours. But a peculiar mutant strain exists, discovered fortuitously, with a much shorter intrinsic period, a day of only about 20 hours. The researchers performed what amounted to a brain transplant, a feat of incredible microsurgery. They carefully took the tiny SCN from a 24-hour hamster and transplanted it into the brain of a 20-hour hamster whose own SCN had been lesioned, effectively removed or destroyed. The result was astonishing, unequivocal, and profoundly elegant. The 20-hour hamster, receiving the transplant, became a 24-hour hamster, its activity rhythm shifting to match that of the donor. And conversely, when the procedure was reversed, a 24-hour hamster receiving a 20-hour SCN began to exhibit a 20-hour daily rhythm. The tiny cluster of 10,000 neurons in the SCN, regardless of the host brain, took decisive control, telling the entire host animal when to sleep, when to be active, and when to get up and start running on its wheel. It was a clear demonstration of a biological pacemaker, but as a complex brain, like that of a mouse or a human, even necessary for an organism to possess an internal clock? Surprisingly, perhaps, the answer is no. Long before any of this intricate neuroscience was understood, back in 1729, a perceptive French astronomer named Jean-Jacques Dortu de Mirain noticed something truly strange and inexplicable about his Mimosa pudica plant, colloquially known as the touch-me-not plant. This plant is well known for its fascinating nyctinastic movements. Its delicate leaves dutifully open during the day, unfurling to capture sunlight, and then fold up tightly at night as if settling down to sleep. De Mirain, driven by scientific curiosity, decided to place his Mimosa pudica in a room that was kept in pitch-black darkness, continuously, without any external light cues. To his utter astonishment, the plant continued its daily ritual, opening and closing its leaves in perfect sync with the outside world, a world it could no longer see, a sun it could not feel. He, by his own account, found his results so perplexing, so counterintuitive, that he couldn't quite believe his own observations, assuming some other mysterious, unseen force was at play. It took 2 more centuries, a vast expanse of scientific progress and discovery, to understand that he had, inadvertently, discovered the very first scientific evidence of an internal clock, a biological rhythm operating independently of external cues, a circadian rhythm in a plant. Now, with the vast panorama of modern biology laid out before us, we know that virtually all life forms on Earth, from the simplest single-celled organisms to the most complex mammals, possess these intricate internal clocks, right down to the fundamental level of single cells. How, then, does a single bacterial cell manage to tell time, and why would it even care about such a sophisticated ability? The answer, elegantly, lies in what is arguably the most important, most fundamental assembly line on Earth: photosynthesis. Cyanobacteria, often referred to as blue-green algae, are tiny, ancient, photosynthetic organisms, representing some of the earliest life forms on our planet. Photosynthesis, the process by which light energy is converted into chemical energy, is the quintessential daytime job. It involves a complex cascade of biochemical reactions, requiring the synthesis of numerous specialized proteins and enzymes. It would be an immense waste of precious cellular energy, a profound inefficiency for the bacterium to synthesize all the proteins and molecular machinery needed for this process during the night, when there is no sunlight to harness. An internal clock that anticipates sunrise, that has an internal prediction of when the light will appear, allows the cell to have its molecular machinery, its photosynthetic factories, already primed and ready to go at first light, maximizing its energy harvest from the very first photon that strikes it. This isn't merely a theoretical advantage, a minor biochemical convenience. It translates directly into a profound competitive edge. In one elegant and highly illustrative experiment, scientists pitted two genetically engineered strains of cyanobacteria against each other in a petri dish, a microcosm of ecological competition. One strain had a natural intrinsic circadian period of 23 hours, slightly shorter than a true day. The other had a natural period of 30 hours, significantly longer. When these two strains were raised together in an environment with an artificial 22-hour day-night cycle, constantly shifted to match the 23-hour strain, the 23-hour strain rapidly outcompeted the other, reproducing more efficiently and taking over the petri dish. It thrived. But when the artificial day-night cycle was precisely stretched to 30 hours, mimicking the longer intrinsic rhythm, the 30-hour strain was the undisputed victor, outperforming its competitor. This beautiful, simple experiment reveals a profound ecological truth. To survive and thrive in a dynamic, rhythmic world, it's not enough to simply have a clock. The clock's intrinsic rhythm must resonate, must be precisely attuned with the rhythm of the external world. Synchronicity, even at the microbial level, is key. The precise molecular mechanism behind this intricate cellular clock, refined over billions of years of evolution, is nothing short of a masterpiece of biological engineering. The story began in the 1970s when two brilliant scientists, Seymour Benzer and his talented student Ron Konopka, embarked on a groundbreaking study of fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster, a tiny organism that has proven to be an invaluable workhorse in genetic research. They observed that fruit flies normally exhibit a precise daily rhythm. They emerge from their pupal case, the larval stage, in the dewy early morning, a behavior that is exquisitely timed. They then discovered mutant strains of these flies that emerged at the wrong times, some too early, some too late, and some, seemingly at random, without any discernible rhythm. Through meticulous genetic analysis, they traced all these mutations to a single, specific gene, which they appropriately named the Trimble period Nipe gene. Decades later, after years of intense scientific investigation by many research groups, the full, elegant mechanism of this molecular clock was finally worked out. It's a classic example of a negative feedback loop, a concept that, surprisingly, can be easily understood by thinking about something as mundane as your toilet tank. When you flush, the water level in the tank drops. This causes a floater ball to go down, which in turn opens a valve, allowing fresh water to refill the tank. As the tank refills, the floater rises, eventually reaching a level where it automatically shuts the valve off, preventing overflow. The cellular clock works on a strikingly similar principle, but with genes and proteins as its components. Here's how it generally functions. The period gene, nestled within the DNA of the cell, is actively transcribed into a messenger RNA-mRNA molecule, which then travels out of the nucleus into the cell's cytoplasm. This mRNA message is then translated by ribosomes into the period protein. As the concentration of this period protein slowly builds up within the cell, reaching a critical threshold, it eventually acts to inhibit or turn off its own gene. It effectively closes the valve of its own production. Then, as the period protein is slowly degraded by other cellular machinery, its concentration gradually falls, Once it drops below a certain level, the 2-period gene is unlocked and kicks back into action, initiating a new round of transcription and translation, and the entire cycle begins again. Yes, my curious listener, how long this intricate, self-sustaining molecular cycle takes to complete in most organisms? Approximately 24 hours. This beautiful, elegant feedback loop is the fundamental biochemical engine of the circadian clock. This exquisite molecular machinery, these tiny, ticking cellular gears, is present in virtually every single cell of your body. However, as we discussed earlier, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN in your brain, has a crucial overarching job. It acts like a master conductor, an orchestral leader, keeping all these billions of individual cellular clocks in perfect sync, ensuring they all play the same daily symphony. It does this primarily by listening to the most important external cue, or Zeitgeber, literally time giver in German, for daily rhythms, sunlight. The SCN strategic location, right above the optic nerves, is no coincidence. It receives raw, direct data about whether it's light or dark outside, the intensity of the light, and the progression of dawn and dusk. This constant influx of light information is precisely how the entire system stays entrained or synchronized to the Earth's precise 24-hour rotation. However, this process of entrainment, of resetting your internal biological clock to match the external day, is slow and remarkably delicate. Anyone who has ever suffered through the disorienting, energy-sapping misery of jet lag knows this intimately. It can take days, sometimes a full week, to fully reset your internal clock after a long flight across multiple time zones. You cannot simply instantly reset the concentration of proteins within a cell, any more than you can instantly reset an hourglass that is half full. The sand must run its course or be turned over manually and slowly allowed to refill. This is why eastward travel across time zones is often perceived as harder, more taxing on the body than westward travel. Traveling east requires advancing your clock, essentially forcing yourself to go to bed earlier than your body's internal clock is ready for. This phase advance is generally harder for most people and their internal clocks to adjust to than delaying it, by staying up later, which often feels more natural and requires less conscious effort. Our modern, relentless 24/7 world, with its insatiable demands for continuous operation and global connectivity, forces millions of people, dedicated factory workers on rotating shifts, tireless doctors and nurses responding to emergencies at all hours, long-haul pilots traversing continents, and countless others, to live in a state of perpetual jet lag. This chronic mismatch, this constant battle between our finely tuned, internal circadian clocks and the irregular, often chaotic external work schedules, is far more than just an inconvenience. It is a serious, growing risk factor for a host of debilitating health problems. The list is long and disturbing, from chronic digestive issues like ulcers and irritable bowel syndrome to more systemic metabolic disorders such as type 2 diabetes and obesity, from increased risk of cardiovascular disease to certain types of cancer, and profound disturbances in mood and cognitive function. The precise timing of our physiology, the intricate orchestration of our internal biological processes, is thrown dramatically out of whack. Your pancreas, for instance, secretes insulin in anticipation of meals, expecting to be fed at certain, predictable times of day. If you're constantly eating at odd hours, disrupting this internal rhythm, this desynchronization between your feeding schedule and your body's metabolic clock can significantly contribute to the development of metabolic disease. The precise coordination between the many clocks, both master and peripheral, in our body is absolutely critical for maintaining health and well-being. In a fascinating and rather dark experiment, revealing the unexpected consequences of this desynchronization, scientists took hamsters with a naturally occurring genetic mutation that gave them a subtly altered 22-hour intrinsic circadian period rather than the normal 24 hours. When these mutant hamsters were forced to live in a controlled laboratory environment with a perfectly normal 24-hour light-dark cycle, essentially living in a constant state of mild jet lag, always fighting their internal clock, they exhibited a significantly shorter lifespan compared to their normal counterparts. Their bodies, perpetually out of sync, seemed to wear down more quickly. But here's the truly stunning and counterintuitive part. When the scientists lesioned the SCN of these mutant hamsters, effectively breaking their master clock, rendering them arrhythmic, their daily cycles becoming chaotic, their lifespan was remarkably prolonged. It's a stunning, almost paradoxical example of a situation where a critical part of the brain, designed for temporal order, was, in this specific context, doing more harm than good. Sometimes, it seems, it's better for an organism to have no precise clock at all, to simply drift without a clear rhythm, than to have one that is perpetually fighting, always battling against, the inexorable rhythm of the external world. A broken clock, in this case, was better than a constantly misaligned one. This intricate circadian clock, for all its astonishing precision and profound importance in orchestrating our daily lives, is, in a sense, a one-trick pony. It is a slow, majestic chronometer, perfectly adapted for the 24-hour cycle of Earth's rotation, but its biochemistry is simply too ponderous, too slow to measure rapid, fleeting intervals. It can't tell you the precise duration of a traffic light, for example, accurately counting its seconds, any more than a majestic sundial can time a 100-meter sprint, a burst of activity measured in milliseconds. Its slowest hand moves in terms of hours, nor does it appear to directly contribute to longer, slower rhythms, known as infradian rhythms, such as the monthly reproductive cycle in women. That cycle's striking proximity to the lunar month, approximately 29.5 days, appears, to our current understanding, to be a mere coincidence, a statistical alignment rather than a causal link mediated by a lunar clock within us. But for some marine creatures, whose lives are intimately tied to the ebb and flow of tides and the subtle dance of lunar phases, the moon is paramount, a central timekeeper. Consider the humble sea worm, Plataneraeus dumerilia, a fascinating creature that exhibits a precise monthly rhythm. They synchronize their spawning, the release of eggs and sperm, to the lunar cycle, specifically to the new moon, to maximize the chances of fertilization in the vastness of the ocean. And, critically, they possess an internal circulunar clock to achieve this remarkable feat of temporal coordination. If you keep these worms in a laboratory under a constant day-night cycle, eliminating all lunar cues, they will still exhibit a precise 30-day reproductive rhythm, a testament to an endogenous lunar clock. And here's the clincher, further reinforcing the multiple clock principle. If you administer a drug that specifically messes up their 24-hour circadian clock, throwing their daily rhythm into disarray, their 30-day circulunar clock keeps ticking just fine, unperturbed, marching to its own separate drum. It's yet another powerful piece of evidence for the grand, overarching principle that our bodies and brains are not like a single, all-purpose Swiss Army knife, designed to handle every temporal task with one universal tool. Rather, they are like a master craftsman's workshop, filled with a vast, specialized array of tools, each one perfectly shaped, exquisitely calibrated, and dedicated to a different temporal task, a different scale of time. Our conscious sense of time, however, that deeply personal, moment-by-moment feeling of the seconds ticking by, the minutes unfolding, the hours progressing, operates in a completely different realm of experience and neural processing. This is the domain of our often discussed sixth sense, that mysterious, often unreliable faculty that allows us to perceive time's passage. As we've thoroughly explored, this sense is wildly inaccurate, prone to dramatic illusions and profound distortions, easily stretched or compressed by attention, emotion, and context. It is in this realm, the world of milliseconds and seconds, the very heartbeat of our conscious experience, that the brain performs its most intricate temporal gymnastics. It is here that it deciphers the complex, rapidly unfolding patterns of music, extracting melody and rhythm from a stream of sound, and the nuances of speech, distinguishing phonemes and words at astonishing speed. Think for a moment of Morse code. It is an ancient, yet remarkably elegant, language built entirely on time. The only difference between a dot, a short signal, and a dash, a long signal, is duration. A short tone versus a long tone. A short pause versus a long pause between characters. To an untrained ear, someone who has never learned it, Morse code is an incomprehensible blur of seemingly random beeps and silences. A chaotic, meaningless sequence. It is impossible to discern where one letter ends and the next begins, let alone string them into words. But to an expert Morse code operator, a seasoned veteran of its temporal rhythms, it is as clear, as comprehensible as a spoken language. Their brain has learned to automatically, effortlessly, recognize these unique temporal objects, the specific patterns of dots, dashes, and pauses, without conscious effort. The sounds don't need to be consciously analyzed for their duration. They are immediately perceived as meaningful units. This is a remarkable feat of temporal pattern recognition, a testament to the brain's ability to automate complex timing tasks. How, then, does the brain achieve this astonishing level of temporal precision and pattern recognition? Does practice, the simple act of repeated exposure and focused training, somehow make our internal timers universally better? To find out, neuroscientists bring people into controlled laboratory settings and test their ability to discriminate between two brief intervals. In a typical task, a subject might hear two brief tones separated by precisely 100 milliseconds, followed by another pair of tones separated by, say, 125 milliseconds. The question is simple. Can they reliably tell which interval was longer? Most people, after a bit of getting used to the task, can. The average threshold for discerning a difference, the smallest amount of time they can reliably detect, is about 24 milliseconds. That is, they can reliably tell the difference between 100 milliseconds and 124 milliseconds, but not, for example, between 100 and 110. But here's the crucial, revealing question that challenges our intuitive notions of a universal stopwatch. What happens if these subjects practice this specific task, say, for an hour a day, for 10 consecutive days, diligently training their temporal discrimination on that 100 millisecond interval? Their timing abilities, predictably and dramatically, get significantly better. The threshold for reliable discrimination drops from 24 milliseconds down to an impressive 10 milliseconds. Practice, focused and consistent, clearly sharpens the brain's internal timers for that specific duration. However, here's the profound twist, the piece of evidence that reshapes our understanding. If they train and become exquisitely skilled at discriminating the 100 millisecond interval, do they also, as a generalized effect, get better at discriminating, say, 50 millisecond or 500 millisecond intervals? If the brain used a single, all-purpose stopwatch a universal timing mechanism, you would intuitively expect the improvement to generalize across all durations, like a single muscle growing stronger, benefiting all movements. But it doesn't. Not at all. The improvement is highly specific. Becoming remarkably good at timing 100 milliseconds has zero effect, literally no discernible improvement on their ability to time other intervals. This tells us something profound and counterintuitive. The brain doesn't have a single master stopwatch that gets broadly better with practice. Instead, it seems to have a multitude of highly specialized timers, a vast collection of unique internal clocks, each precisely tuned to a specific duration, operating independently, or at least semi-independently, of one another. Musicians, of course, are the undisputed masters of this domain of precise temporal control. Think of a drummer, or a lead guitarist, or a symphony conductor. When asked to tap along with a beat, their timing is far more consistent, less variable, and more accurate than that of non-musicians. Drummers, in particular, often show superior ability to discriminate and reproduce intervals around 1 second, the typical range for musical beats. But this innate ability to keep a beat, to synchronize one's movements to an external rhythm, something so simple and seemingly natural for us humans, is, astonishingly, incredibly rare in the animal kingdom. You might see captivating viral videos of pets, like dogs or cats, bobbing their heads to music. But most of these behaviors are likely just responsive movements, perhaps conditioned responses to their owners' cues, rather than true predictive synchronization to the rhythm. True synchronization, the sophisticated ability to predict the next beat and move precisely in time with it, appears to be inextricably linked to a complex and evolutionarily rare skill, vocal learning. Animals that can learn to produce new vocalizations by listening to and imitating others. A select club that includes humans. Certain species of birds, like parrots and songbirds, whales, seals, and elephants, seem to be the very same ones that possess the capacity to follow a beat, to entrain to a musical rhythm. The prevailing theory is that the tight, specialized neural wiring between the auditory system, the ability to hear and process sound, and the motor system, the ability to produce and control movements, that is required for complex vocal learning, also provides the necessary neurological hardware for synchronizing movement to sound. Our closest primate cousins, like monkeys, for all their intelligence and problem-solving abilities, struggle immensely with this task. Even after a year of intensive training, a rhesus monkey cannot learn to reliably tap a button in sync with a periodic tone. For them, keeping the beat, something we do effortlessly, is a task of baffling difficulty. The songbird, particularly the male zebrafinch, provides one of the most beautiful and illuminating windows into the neural mechanisms of complex timing, a miniature maestro of the temporal arts. Male zebrafinches, crucial for courtship and mating, learn elaborate, highly structured courtship songs from their elders, often their fathers. These songs are not random sequences of chirps, they possess a precise temporal hierarchy. Individual notes combine to form syllables, syllables combine to form phrases, and phrases form the complete song. The intricate timing of these songs is controlled by a specific, well-defined brain area known as the nucleus HVC, high vocal center. Neuroscientists have observed that specific neurons within the HVC fire at remarkably precise moments during the song, like a meticulously orchestrated chain of falling dominoes, each one triggering the next at an exact temporal interval. One neuron might fire 100 milliseconds into the song, another at 500 milliseconds, and so on, creating a unique temporal signature for each element of the song. But is this correlation merely an observation of co-occurring events, or is it true causation? Is the HVC genuinely controlling the timing, or simply reflecting it? To find out, two brilliant neuroscientists, Michael Long and Mikhail Fee, performed an audacious and elegant experiment. They inserted a tiny, exquisitely engineered cooling element, a miniature thermoelectric device, directly into the HVC of a singing bird. The principle was simple. Cooling biological tissue slows down its metabolic rate, reducing the speed of neural processing. The effect was immediate, stunning, and profoundly revealing. As the HVC was cooled, the birds began to sing in slow motion. The entire song, every single note, every specific syllable, every precisely timed pause, was stretched out uniformly by as much as 40% of its normal duration. Crucially, cooling other motor areas involved in singing, but not directly involved in timing, had no effect whatsoever on the song's temporal structure. The HVC, it seems, is the undisputed conductor of the song's temporal orchestra, a living, breathing metronome. So how exactly do these neural circuits, these intricate networks of firing neurons, tell time with such astonishing precision and flexibility? The old, more simplistic idea of an internal clock, imagined as a single, centralized oscillator generating a steady beat coupled with a counter accumulating those beats, has largely fallen out of favor in modern neuroscience. While individual neurons are indeed capable of oscillating, of generating rhythmic electrical activity, they are generally terrible at counting with the digital precision required for complex timing. The emerging view, far more elegant and breathtaking in its complexity, suggests that the brain uses the intrinsic dynamics of its own vast, interconnected neural networks to encode and process temporal information. Think again of a physical analogy, the ripples created by a single raindrop falling into a still pond. The expanding concentric pattern of waves is a dynamic physical system that naturally encodes the time that has passed since the drop hit the water. The size and spread of the ripples are directly proportional to the elapsed time. A snapshot of the pond, taken at any given moment, could, in theory, tell you precisely when the drop fell. Neural networks, in a remarkably analogous way, do something similar. Every time a neuron fires, it causes subtle, temporary, yet measurable changes in the strength of the synapses, the tiny junctions it connects to. These changes, known as short-term synaptic plasticity, are not long-lasting, like the changes underlying long-term memory, but they persist for hundreds of milliseconds, perhaps even up to a second. The exact strength of a particular synapse at any given moment thus contains crucial information about how recently it was used, how recently the neuron connected to it was active. The current electrical and chemical state of a neural network, therefore, is not just a reflection of its current inputs, it is an emergent product of its immediate past. The way the network responds to a new input, how it processes information, depends exquisitely on what just happened, on the history encoded in its synaptic strengths. Like a pond with multiple ripples interacting and overlapping, creating a complex, ever-changing surface pattern, the network's recent past is encoded in its present state. This leads directly to the compelling idea of a, quote, population clock. Time in this sophisticated model isn't encoded by the activity of a single, dedicated, timing neuron, nor by a simple, linear chain of sequential activations. Instead, it is encoded in the dynamically changing pattern of activity across a vast, interconnected population of neurons. Imagine, if you will, the lit windows of a skyscraper at night. At any given moment, the specific pattern of which lights are on and which are off defines the unique state of the building. As this pattern shifts and changes over time, Lights turning on and off in a complex yet predictable sequence. It creates a unique trajectory through a high-dimensional space, a constantly evolving signature. The brain, with its unparalleled ability to recognize patterns, can use such dynamic trajectories as a clock. At, say, 100 milliseconds after a specific stimulus, one particular unique population of neurons might be active in a distinctive pattern. At 200 milliseconds, a different, though possibly overlapping, population of neurons might be active in its own unique pattern. To know the time that has elapsed, the rest of the brain simply needs to read which specific population of neurons is currently firing in its characteristic pattern. The profound beauty and power of this distributed system is that a single neural network, a single interconnected web of neurons, can simultaneously be many clocks at once. For example, a low-frequency tone might trigger one specific, dynamically evolving trajectory of neural activity, while a high-frequency tone might trigger a completely different, independent trajectory. This is precisely how a rabbit can learn to blink its eye 150 milliseconds after one specific tone, but then, in a different context, perform the same blink 750 milliseconds after a different tone. The network isn't just telling time in a generic sense, it's telling time in a highly context-specific, stimulus-dependent way. It's not a universal clock, but an event-specific clock. Or perhaps a multitude of event-specific clocks, each tailored to the unique demands of the perceived world. But this elegant theory, this idea of dynamic neural trajectories encoding time, immediately raises a terrifying and deeply challenging problem. The very properties that make neural networks so powerful and adaptive, their intricate feedback loops, their inherent nonlinearity, the way small changes can lead to large effects, also make them notoriously prone to chaos. In a chaotic system, like the unpredictable fluctuations of the weather, infinitesimally tiny differences in initial conditions can lead to vastly different, unpredictable outcomes over time. This is the famous butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil might, in theory, set off a tornado in Texas. A neural network that is truly chaotic would not produce the same reproducible trajectory of activity every single time. It would be a useless clock, incapable of generating the reliable, precise temporal patterns that our brains demonstrably produce for music, speech, and motor control. This was, for a long time, a serious dilemma for neuroscientists. The brain clearly generates reproducible, highly precise patterns. You can sign your name the same way over and over again, or play a complex melody with astonishing temporal fidelity. Yet the underlying physics of such complex networks suggested they should behave chaotically. We are still actively unraveling this profound mystery, but the prevailing understanding is that the brain, through the miraculous processes of learning and development, has discovered incredibly sophisticated learning rules that essentially tame the chaos. Synaptic connections, the strengths of those tiny junctions between neurons, are tuned and refined in just the right way, through repeated experience and intricate developmental processes, to carve stable, reliable, and reproducible trajectories through the network's vast, high-dimensional state space. It's like a powerful, untamed river carving a deep, predictable canyon through a complex, variegated landscape. The information for a complex, timed motor pattern, like the precise sequence of muscle movements required to write your name, isn't stored in any one specific neuron or any single static location in the brain. Instead, it is an emergent property of the entire network's dynamics, woven into the very fabric of its interconnectedness. It is, in a profound sense, both everywhere and nowhere at once, distributed across the entire system. This brings us to a deep, fascinating and perhaps profoundly unsettling parallel between the highest reaches of theoretical physics and the intricate workings of the human mind. In the early 20th century, physics, particularly through the revolutionary insights of Albert Einstein, fundamentally spatialized time. Einstein's special theory of relativity shattered the deeply ingrained intuitive idea of a universal, absolute, flowing now that permeates the entire cosmos simultaneously. Instead, time became just another dimension, inextricably woven together with the three familiar dimensions of space, length, width, and height, into a unified, static, four-dimensional block universe. In this block universe, all of time, past, present, and future, is conceptualized as existing simultaneously, like frames on a reel of film, equally real and fixed, awaiting discovery rather than creation. The future is already there, just as the past is. And it appears, through its own arduous, opportunistic evolutionary journey, the human brain, independently, arrived at a remarkably similar solution. Our very ability to comprehend and manipulate the abstract concept of time, to think about it, to plan for it, seems to have been co-opted or repurposed from the much older, more concrete neural circuits that evolved over eons to understand and navigate space. We see this profound connection reflected deeply in our everyday language, in the metaphors we instinctively use. We talk about a long day or a short meeting, using spatial adjectives to describe temporal durations. We look forward to the future as if it lies ahead of us on a path, and we put the past behind us, as if it recedes into a physical distance. In English and many other Indo-European languages, the future is indeed often conceptualized as being in front, something we move towards, and the past as behind, something we leave behind. But this isn't a universal linguistic or cognitive mapping. The Aymara people, an indigenous group living high in the Andes Mountains of South America, conceptualize time in a strikingly different way, providing a fascinating counterpoint. For them, the past, which is known, which has been experienced, which has been seen with their own eyes, is conceptually in front of them, visible, because it is accessible to memory. The future, which is unknown, which has not yet been seen, which remains a mystery, is, conceptually, behind their back, invisible, because it cannot be directly perceived or recalled. This linguistic and cognitive difference profoundly illustrates how deeply intertwined our language, our spatial metaphors, and our very perception of time can be. This connection between space and time in our minds runs even deeper than mere metaphor. The physical space between events, literally, demonstrably, influences our perception of the time between them. This is known as the, quote, kappa effect, a curious perceptual phenomenon. If two lights are flashed, say 8 seconds apart, people's estimate of that duration, that 8-second interval, will be reliably longer if the lights are physically farther apart in space. Conversely, if the lights are close together, the same 8-second interval will feel shorter. It seems as though our internal clock and our internal odometer, our sense of distance, are intimately cross-wired, subtly influencing each other. This may be because the brain evolved to recognize the deep statistical regularities of the world. In our everyday experience, things that travel farther generally take more time to do so. A long journey implies a long duration. So the brain, in its relentless quest for efficiency and accuracy, intelligently uses perceived distance as a powerful clue to help its imperfect, context-dependent timers make a better, more informed guess about duration. It seems the human brain, in its remarkable endeavor to make sense of the fourth dimension, of time itself, naturally fell back on the sophisticated, evolutionarily ancient tools it had already perfected for understanding and navigating the first 3 dimensions of space. And it was this profound, often unconscious mental spatialization of time, this inherent creation of a mental timeline that we can conceptually travel along, that truly unlocked our species' most defining and arguably most dangerous superpower: mental time travel. This extraordinary cognitive capacity is formally known as episodic future thinking. It is far more than simply anticipating what will happen next, like a cat predicting where a mouse will be based on its trajectory, or a squirrel remembering where it buried a nut. All animals, even the simplest ones, exhibit a basic level of anticipation, a reactive ability to predict immediate, salient events in their environment. Mental time travel, in its uniquely human sense, is the sophisticated ability to construct rich, detailed, internally generated simulations of possible futures, to vividly imagine scenarios that do not yet exist, and, crucially, to use those elaborate simulations to guide our actions and decisions in the present moment. It is this unparalleled ability that underlies our species' most remarkable achievements and defines our unique place in the natural world. It is the fundamental reason we plant seeds for a harvest that will not ripen for many months away, a future reward that requires immediate, sustained effort. It is the reason we embark on grand architectural projects, like building magnificent cathedrals that will take centuries to complete, knowing that we will never live to see their finished splendor, yet driven by a vision of a distant future. It is the reason we inscribe warnings on massive tsunami stones along ancient coastlines, advising future generations, whom we will never meet, to build their homes high above the reach of the waves, a profound act of intergenerational foresight. This ability to project ourselves into the far future, to manipulate hypothetical scenarios, and to plan for events that lie far beyond our immediate perceptual horizon, is a cornerstone of human culture, civilization, and our capacity for accumulating knowledge and progress. Is this extraordinary ability, this capacity for mental time travel, uniquely human? The debate among cognitive scientists and ethologists rages on, fueled by tantalizing, often ambiguous, evidence from the animal kingdom. Nicola Clayton's groundbreaking work with scrub jays, a species of corvid, is particularly compelling and often cited. These highly intelligent birds are known for their impressive caching behavior. They hide food for later consumption. Clayton's research suggests that they seem to remember not just where they hid food, but also what kind of food it was and, crucially, when they hid it. They have a strong preference for worms over nuts, recognizing worms as a higher value but perishable food source. If they know, through experimental conditioning, that they will be allowed back to their cache in just 4 hours, a short interval, they will reliably go for the spot where they hid the perishable, delicious worms, knowing they will still be fresh. But if they know 5 days will pass before they return, a longer interval, they wisely ignore the worm spot, knowing the worms will have decayed and become inedible, and instead go directly for the nuts, which are non-perishable. This suggests a sophisticated form of episodic memory extending into the future. They even seem to plan for complex social situations. If a jay knows it was being watched by another jay while caching its food, it will later, after the observing bird has left, come back to that cache, dig up its food and recache it somewhere else, anticipating a future theft. This is a remarkable demonstration of theory of mind and future planning in a non-human animal. Some great apes, our closest genetic relatives, also show a degree of foresight, though perhaps not as complex as that of the scrub jays. Chimpanzees, for example, have been observed learning to save tokens that they know they can exchange for food 30 minutes later, demonstrating a capacity to delay gratification for a future reward. They can even select the correct tools for a future task. But for all this remarkable cleverness, for all the fascinating demonstrations of animal cognition, there remains a vast, unbridged chasm between human mental time travel and that of other species. As the eminent primatologist Jane Goodall noted from her decades of observing chimpanzees in the wild, these highly intelligent animals can't communicate about things that aren't physically present in their immediate environment. They can't discuss what happened 100 years ago, or plan for 5 years ahead. They certainly can't sit around a campfire and share complex narratives about the distant past or meticulously plan for a far-off future. This advanced level of temporal projection, this capacity for abstract, detailed, and flexible future simulation, seems to require the unique confluence of several human capacities: sophisticated language, a robust number sense, and the kind of abstract, symbolic thought that is our species' hallmark. Consider the fascinating case of the Piraha tribe, a small indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil. Their language, as studied by the linguist Daniel Everett, is remarkable for its apparent lack of complex grammatical tenses that clearly distinguish past, present, and future in the way most languages do. Their number system is also incredibly simple, essentially 1, 2, many, lacking precise numerical quantification beyond 2. These linguistic features seem to correlate with a way of life almost entirely grounded in the immediate present. They do not store food for long periods or engage in much conversation about the distant past or the far future. Everett, who lived with them for years and speaks their language fluently, believes this is not a cognitive deficit, a lack of ability, but rather a profound cultural choice, a deliberate focus on what he calls immediacy of experience. Their culture places immense value on direct, observable experience in the present moment, shaping their linguistic and temporal cognition. For most of us, however, for the vast majority of humanity, our minds are incessant, tireless time travelers. We are constantly flitting between memories of yesterday and plans for tomorrow, our consciousness a kaleidoscope of past, present, and future. Yet, for a species that possesses the profound capacity to plan for centuries, to build monuments that will outlast generations, we are often remarkably, paradoxically short-sighted in our everyday decisions. We accumulate crippling credit card debt for immediate gratification, prioritizing a fleeting pleasure now over long-term financial stability. We sacrifice our long-term health for the ephemeral pleasure of an unhealthy meal, choosing immediate indulgence over future well-being. As societies, we often defer difficult, politically unpopular decisions, kicking the can of economic instability or environmental disaster down the road for future generations to deal with, perpetuating a dangerous cycle of temporal myopia. This temporal myopia, this inherent bias towards immediate rewards over delayed, larger ones, is a deep-seated part of our evolutionary heritage, forged in the crucible of a harsh and unpredictable past. For the vast majority of human history, the world was a dangerous and uncertain place. Survival was often a day-to-day struggle. A small, certain meal today, a bird in the hand, was worth far more, had a significantly higher survival value than the promise of a larger, uncertain one tomorrow, because tomorrow might never come. This powerful, intuitive bias for immediate reward, often referred to as delay discounting, is deeply hardwired into our neural reward systems. $1,000 today feels palpably more valuable, more desirable than $2,000 a year from now. And yet, Curiously, if asked to choose between $1,000 in 1 year or $2,000 in 2 years, the choice suddenly becomes much easier. The impatience diminishes. When both rewards are in the distant future, when the immediate now is removed from the equation, our patience grows, and we become more rational in our long-term choices. It is the seductive, almost irresistible pull of the immediate now that so often trips us up, overriding our long-term foresight. Our remarkable ability to overcome this innate bias, to engage in sophisticated mental time travel, and to make patient, far-sighted long-term plans, appears to be heavily reliant on the prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the brain, located right behind your forehead. This region, a hub of executive function, plays a crucial role in impulse control, planning, and abstract reasoning. People with damage to this area, often due to injury or disease, become incredibly impulsive, seemingly unable to delay gratification, living almost entirely in the present moment, their future horizons dramatically truncated. Brain imaging studies, using techniques like fMRI, consistently show this area lighting up with increased activity when we engage in patient, future-oriented decisions, when we consciously override our present bias to think about long-term consequences. But the prefrontal cortex doesn't work in isolation. It operates in concert with other vital brain areas, most notably the hippocampus, that seahorse-shaped structure we encountered earlier in the tragic case of Clive Waring. The hippocampus provides the rich, detailed, episodic memories of the past, our personal experiences, our triumphs, our failures, that serve as the raw material, the building blocks for our future simulations. We literally project past experiences into possible future scenarios. The tragic case of patient KC, another famous amnesia patient who, like Clive Waring, lost his episodic memory due to hippocampal damage, shows this link clearly and heartbreakingly. When asked what he would be doing tomorrow, his mind was simply blank, devoid of any capacity for future projection. Without a detailed, personal past to draw from, without the ability to vividly recall specific events, he could not, literally, construct a future. His mental time machine was stuck, permanently, in the present. This then brings us back, full circle, to the final, deepest, and perhaps most profound mysteries that lie at the intersection of science, philosophy, and our lived experience. The fundamental clash between the time of physics and the time of the mind. The laws of physics, from Newton's classical mechanics to Einstein's revolutionary theories of relativity to the baffling intricacies of quantum mechanics, are, for the most part, remarkably time-symmetric. They run as well backward as they do forward. The equations that describe the motion of particles, the flow of energy, or the interaction of forces do not inherently distinguish between past and future. If you were to watch a video of a physical process governed by these laws played in reverse, it would, in many cases, look perfectly plausible, without violating any fundamental physical principles. They contain no special, privileged now, no inherent arrow of time. The only major exception is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy, or disorder, always increases over time, giving a statistical direction to time's arrow. But this statistical arrow does not explain our conscious experience of flowing time. This inherent time symmetry in physics has led many prominent physicists and philosophers to embrace eternalism, often referred to as the block universe view, where past, present, and future are all equally real and coexist in a static four-dimensional space-time block. As Einstein himself, deeply aware of this profound philosophical implication of his work, wrote in a poignant letter of condolence to the family of a deceased friend, "For us believing physicists, the division between past, present, and future has merely the meaning of an albeit obstinate illusion." He, the architect of space-time, recognized that our most fundamental experience of time was at odds with the universe his equations described. But if the flow of time, if this constant, undeniable forward march, is truly an illusion, a grand neural deception, then what is creating it? And why? Evolution, that ruthless sculptor of life, does not typically produce such elaborate, universal, and functionally useless deceptions. Our subjective experiences, from the vibrant perception of color to the piercing sensation of pain, are indeed mental constructs, interpretations of raw sensory data. They correlate with real, physically important phenomena in the outside world. They are adaptive. Seeing color helps us find ripe fruit. Feeling pain protects us from danger. What could possibly be the adaptive value, the survival advantage, of experiencing a flowing time, of being tricked into believing in a continuous present, in a universe where nothing fundamentally flows, where past, present, and future are all equally fixed? Why would natural selection expend so much energy creating such a compelling, yet ultimately false, narrative? Furthermore, consciousness itself, that most intimate and profound aspect of our being, seems to be an inherently temporal process. It isn't instantaneous, a snapshot in time. It takes time for sensory signals to travel from our eyes or ears to the brain, to be processed, and to finally bubble up into our conscious awareness. Experiments consistently show that there's a delay. It takes at least a third of a second, often more, for a sensory signal to fully enter our conscious perception. The brain, in this model, waits, gathers incoming information, integrates it, and then constructs a coherent story, a continuous narrative of reality, often editing events in retrospect to make them fit, to create a seamless, flowing experience. Consciousness, it appears, requires a certain, quote, temporal thickness, a duration within which to unfold. Can it even exist in a single static slice of the block universe, frozen in an eternal now? Or does the very nature of consciousness necessitate a dynamic, flowing reality? And then, perhaps the most unsettling question of all, intricately linked to the nature of time, the question of free will. If the future is as fixed and real as the past, already laid out in the unchanging tapestry of the block universe, then our deeply ingrained, visceral feeling of choosing our path, of making genuine decisions, is nothing more than the ultimate illusion, a comforting lie we tell ourselves. The neuroscientific evidence, ironically, adds another layer of complexity, another unsettling piece to this profound puzzle. Pioneering experiments, dating back to Benjamin Libet in the 1980s and refined by subsequent researchers, have shown that we can detect the neural activity corresponding to a willed decision to move a finger hundreds of milliseconds, almost a full second, before the person themselves is consciously aware of having made that decision. This seemingly implies that our conscious feeling of will, our subjective experience of agency, may be more of an after-the-fact narration, a retrospective attribution, than a true causal initiator of our actions. We are, as the Victorian biologist Thomas Huxley famously put it, conscious automata, machines endowed with the powerful, compelling, yet perhaps illusory, feeling of free will. But this doesn't, necessarily, absolve us of responsibility, nor should it plunge us into a nihilistic despair. For you, the listener, are your brain. Your unconscious processes, the vast, hidden machinery operating beneath the surface of awareness, are as much a part of you, of your identity, as your conscious thoughts, your deliberate intentions. The decisions, even if initiated subconsciously, are still yours. They are the product of your unique brain, shaped by your genes, your experiences, your learning. The question shifts from, "Do I truly choose?" to, "Who is this I that chooses, regardless of conscious timing?" We are left, then, at a profound impasse, a beautiful, terrifying crossroads of understanding, a perfect storm of unsolved mysteries. Is our most intimate, undeniable experience of reality, the relentless, unidirectional passage of time, the feeling of a flowing now, a deep, fundamental truth about the universe that physics, in its current formulation, has yet to grasp, a property of consciousness itself that transcends the block universe? Or is it, as Einstein suggested, merely a fiction, a grand, compelling story our brain tells itself, a narrative so exquisitely crafted, so universally convincing, that we have irrevocably mistaken it for the world itself, for the ultimate, objective truth? We don't have the definitive answer. The journey of discovery continues. But what we do know, with unwavering certainty, is that we possess this strange, powerful, and deeply human ability, born from the complex interplay of evolution, attention, memory, and the extraordinary capacities of our neural networks. An ability forged from the co-opting of our spatial sense and the taming of chaos within the electrical symphony of our brains. The ability to mentally leave the present moment, to revisit a past that is gone, to learn from its triumphs and its failures, and to create, to simulate, a future that is not yet here, a future filled with infinite possibilities. Whether that future is an open, unwritten path, or a preordained destination already laid out in the static fabric of the block. Whether that future is an open, unwritten path, or a preordained destination already laid out in the static fabric of the block universe, it makes little difference to our immediate, undeniable responsibility. Our gift, and indeed our profound burden, as conscious, sentient beings, is to act in the now, in this precious, fleeting present, using the full power of our foresight, our empathy, and our intelligence to create a future that we will want to inhabit when it finally, inevitably, becomes our present. As you drift now, let these paradoxes and wonders of time gently settle within your mind. Let the unanswered questions become a soft hum, a lullaby of cosmic mystery. The past recedes, the future awaits, and the present moment, whatever its true nature, embraces you. Allow your consciousness to soften, to expand beyond the immediate, to consider the vastness of temporal existence. There is no urgency here, no need to grasp, only to feel, to perceive, to be. Sleep now, knowing that within you, the universe's greatest mysteries are unfolding, quietly, beautifully, in every breath. Let the river of time carry you gently into the peaceful depths of slumber.